So here is a tweet called Climate Change Solutions. I have a number of videos out about climate change. In some contexts, I do refer to it as the modern religion of global warming, but there are effects to the changing of the climate. Climate does change. Check out my video, the Anthropogenic Global Warming Glossary #1 on BitChute and YouTube, where I talk a little bit more about how I feel about climate change as a topic of rhetoric and discussion, especially politically, but in terms of science as well. So I'll talk about climate change solutions. I give good and bad here. We'll start with the good. Good. Plant trees. Climate change solution. Plant trees. Develop Generation 3 and 4 nuclear power. Make solar energy viable. Work on carbon capture. Improve fossil fuel efficiency. So these are all the good things we could do. Going into the next thing are the bad climate change solutions, the ones we shouldn't be doing. Bad climate change solutions. Eat bugs instead of steak. Don't have children. Enact authoritarianism. Apply a carbon tax. And halt the world economy. So let's start with the good and talk just a little bit about each of these little items here. Plant trees. So, of course, trees eat carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the devil of the modern religion known as global warming. CO2, they say that it's causing all these problems with rising of water and melting of the ice caps. They're all related. Now, there are certain environments in the world that are very hot, and if they get more hot, people will die. And there's places that are very cold, and of course, everything follows. If you get colder, it'll probably cause problems as well. So there's places where we have to be aware of our environment. I consider myself an environmentalist. So we want to be aware of our impact on the environment. So I'm not saying that climate change isn't real. I'm not saying that global warming necessarily isn't the truth. I do have an agnosticism to the modern religion because, frankly, we've heard stories of global warming, global cooling back in the 1970s, and over the years, weather has been used. The sky is falling, things are getting warmer, things are getting colder. It's been used to generate fear since the beginning of civilization. People worship the sun. And now, people would pray for rain. They do rain dances. They'd pray for rain so their crops would grow. We have a lot of attachment to, our mood changes when we see the rain outside. So CO2, of course, is the devil. You got to lower your carbon. Breathe a little less. Oh, shit. I let some go. Check out my video on YouTube, Carbon Guilt, for more about that. But we want to plant trees. If we plant a couple billion trees, maybe even 1 trillion trees over time, it'll eat up more of that carbon dioxide and it will produce oxygen for us all to breathe. And we will then, of course, breathe it in and emit carbon dioxide. The trees eat that. If I'm getting any of this wrong, let me know in the comments section below. But planting trees is a good climate change solution. Developing Generation 3 and 4 nuclear power. So nuclear is the power source of the future. My friend Mark Schneider talks about this quite often. He's a big advocate and expert on Generation 3 and 4 nuclear. And what makes these different, and when people think about nuclear, they think a lot about Chernobyl, and they think about other things that are a bit more negative in terms of, there's radiation effects. But now that was many years ago, those older reactors. We also think of things like the atom bomb and all this stuff, nuclear bombs and all these things that are highly destructive. But Generation 3 and notably Generation 4 have a couple of things going for them that I think should help people get over their fears. And one of them is that Generation 4 can't melt down. It has protections against melting down, which is one of the biggest fears about nuclear in general. But not only that, it eats nuclear waste for fuel. Generation 4 nuclear designs eat nuclear waste for fuel with a high yield, about 80 to 90%. So not only are they cleaner, they're more environmentally friendly, they don't emit the carbon that, burning oil and gas and things do. They also, of course, use their own waste for fuel. So I think we should be developing more and more nuclear energy. I think it could be the solution to our long-term problems, and every town can have its own reactors. So the technological advances of nuclear energy have been so dramatic over the past 30, 40, 50 years that people that were scared of it for reasons that might have to do with, Russia, Cold War, might have to do with propaganda that, nuclear is just something we don't want for some political reason from the 70s and 60s. Look it up. We don't have to worry about that anymore because we have come so far. We have these newer designs, and many of them are already in action. I think France is about 85 to 90% nuclear. And while I don't have the fear of the carbon from fossil fuels and natural gas and such, I do think that nuclear is going to be future proof and forward thinking. So definitely develop those. Third good climate change solution is called make solar energy viable. So right now, solar energy and wind-based energy essentially are, how do I put this? If you're using solar or wind as a product, you're leaning pretty heavily on fossil fuels to fill in where these two can't provide. They fall back. The backup plan is the fossil fuels. So really, while they might come off as potentially, might seem like, oh, well, solar, wind, they're cleaner. The fact that they rely on dirtier energy to maintain their stability, to maintain their power output, is pretty important. So we have to figure out a way to make solar energy viable, to make it, more affordable to install, to make it more passive, like have a solar here, solar there. Relying on solar alone isn't going to happen. We're going to be using natural gas, nuclear, oil, all this stuff. We're going to be using fossil fuel for this for a long time. And coal, too. I mean, coal is another one that's being processed more and more. Working on carbon capture. So some of these nuclear power plants have this thing that they could have nearby called carbon capture. You can actually attach it to a nuclear plant. There's designs for that out there. But the general idea of carbon capture is actually literally sucking the carbon dioxide out of the air using a complicated process and machine and converting it into fuel, converting it to other things. So you're actually, if you think there's too much CO2 in the air, you have carbon capture, you can actually remove the carbon from the air and find another application for it. Carbon dioxide, CO2. And finally, under good is improve fossil fuel efficiency. So basically, fossil fuels aren't going away. We just had all this stuff happen with Russia and Saudi Arabia and the United States talking about, many years ago we talked about peak oil, but now we're looking in gas is cheaper than ever, and there's a lot of stuff happening. We're not seeing much of an impact on the climate. The climate's just going along fine for the most part. They'll cherry pick for the modern religion of global warming, but ultimately it's not going to change anything because we don't all have electric cars. Electric cars require charging that takes energy from other sources. There's not enough lithium in the world for everyone to have it. So we're going to have to deal with managing. If you think that CO2 is declining the world's health, if you're declining the health of the earth itself, you're going to be managing the decline for the rest of your life. That's basically what it's going to be, because fossil fuels aren't going away. I'm not giving up my gas guzzler. Nobody is, we're trying to do hybrid, but basically so many houses, homes in America, buildings, all these things are natural gas, fossil fuel, and oil. And we have to work within that, not try to erase it. That's my opinion. Of course, some scientists may disagree. They might say, well, we're almost to the tipping point. We're almost to the tipping point. And I say, well, look, you can't just, some countries haven't even gotten to where we are yet with gas and oil. You can't just say, well, it's a first world privileged thing to do, to say, let's get rid of this, because over in India, they just got electricity in certain areas. China, these 1.4, 1.5 billion people, they're struggling with it. There's third world countries all over the world, all over the place, that don't have the resources or technology we have, and they're relying more and more on coal and oil. They don't have the privilege of setting up, a billion windmills or something like that. It's just not going to happen. They don't have the money. We don't have the resources. So finally, we're going to go into the bad. And these are pretty bad. This is hilariously bad. First one is eat bugs instead of steak. For a climate change solution, you want to eat bugs instead of steak? No. I know we talked earlier in the video about food thoughts, and that, hey, maybe you can imagine you're eating something better and your brain will do some of the work, and you don't have to eat high quality food. You can eat low quality and pretend it's high quality, and eventually you'll convince yourself of it, so your standards will lower, and it'll be in your best interest for that to happen. Whatever I said earlier in the video. But bugs? Bugs? Now, I know that's kind of red meat. That's that's finding not the most intellectual person or argument to go after, but going after one of the more ridiculous extremes. It's very red meat. It may even be a steak. But the people were out there saying that we should start learning how to eat bugs, process bugs into food, and use them for everything, instead of having the luxury of cows and meat, red meat and steak and all this stuff. And I'm like, no, you're not going to tell me I can't eat steak. To save the environment, to save the trees, save the environment, save the ozone layer. That's what I heard 30 years ago. Ozone layer is fine, folks. Ozone layer is fine. But they were saying that. Don't have children. AOC, God bless her. She's like, maybe you shouldn't have children. Don't bring them into this world, this flaming ball of shit that's flying through the galaxy. Because the more children you have, the more they're going to have to deal with climate change, the evils that are coming in 10 years or 30 years, or maybe we said they were coming 40 years ago, but they never came. Maybe they're coming in 100 years. Let's go with 2080 or 2100. How about that? By then, you're going to know climate change is real. Climate change is a real problem. Just have to wait. Patience is a virtue. You just have to wait till 2080. And meanwhile, don't have children. Lower the birth rates of the United States. Or wherever you'd like, whatever multicultural environment you want to lower the birth rates in, go ahead and do it. The next thing is enact authoritarianism. So basically try to take control over everything to save the environment. Recently there were people that had apparently taken over Maine fishing up in Maine, because it wasn't environmental, and so they gave the American fishermen and fisherwomen, the men and women of the fishing industry, they gave them a disadvantage against Canada and many other countries and states by saying that, hey, you can't fish here. And so they could do more of that. They could say, you can't burn fires here because carbon comes out of the flame. You can't drive your car. Can't have children. You can't eat steak. I already covered it. It's all in that same authoritarian frame, basically. You can't do this. You can't do that. Why? The invisible man in the sky told me. His name's climate change. The man's name is climate change. Another friend of his is called Entropy. Entropy. And he's also a son of a bitch. But they'll enact authoritarianism. They'll tell you all the stuff you shouldn't do, you can't do, because of climate. And they'll even apply a carbon tax. Everybody has to pay a carbon tax. Every time you do something that's carbon related, you pay a tax. It's just another tax for basically living a normal American life, a normal, you drive a car that isn't all electric. There's a tax on you for that. Anything you're doing to contribute to this thing that we can't really measure in any meaningful way. Like, we have all our models and things. We have all our little measurements of different parts of it. But ultimately, nobody has cracked the code of weather. It's just never been done. That's why the experts disagree on some of the finer points. Even the smartest people in the world disagree with some of this stuff that other people are saying. And so carbon tax is just another way to get you to pay higher taxes, and then give an excuse, well, climate. So that's not a great climate change solution for me. And of course, the final one, and a big one, is a bad solution for climate change would be to halt the world economy. Because frankly, if you say, we're not going to use fossil fuels anymore, we're not going to use the energy we've been using that much of the world uses, we're going to effectively close off production in other countries. If they're being told in India or any of these other places, in the Middle East or in anywhere in Africa, Europe, Asia, anywhere in the world, they're told you can't. I know you're a growing country, you're a growing economy, you're trying to get bigger and better, but we got to tell you can't use natural gas, coal, or oil anymore. That's going to halt the world economy. That's going to stop countries that had a chance, that were third world, that were trying their best, that were trying to play with the big boys, to come up, and it was working. But we can't go ahead and stop their power source. There's no better option. We have nuclear. We're trying to develop it, but it's going to be decades before nuclear is standard across the world, if ever. And we're fighting. There's a war. There's like a civil war going on in Africa. There's Ebola. There's all these things that are holding these people back. And you're going to add another factor in there that, for climate change, we're going to make it harder for you to get energy because ozone layer and CO2 is up and water levels, the tide gauges in some places haven't changed in 30 years. Okay? The tide gauges haven't changed in some places for 30 years. They're not trending. Al Gore said that, hey, the guy that we all, in Inconvenient Truth, one of the biggest pieces on climate change in the past 20 years, Manhattan's going to be underwater by 2014. And then Barack Obama goes ahead and buys a $15 million mansion on, Martha's Vineyard? So I only bring politics into it because it's a political question at this point. Like, we have the science on one end. You can't mix and match. There is scientific fact about the way that physics works, chemistry works, and what geologists do, and all this stuff with the climate scientists, which is not really necessarily an exact, occupation. It's more of like a popular term for people that happen to have different disciplines or degrees and expertise in different areas in climate. But I digress. We have people finding the truth about our reality, but then you have the other side. Politics, you have persuasion, you have manipulation, propaganda, you have people that allow our emotions. We all allow our emotions to drive our decision making. We have our in-group preference, our bias. But in politics, they've turned it into this question of, well, if you're pro-science, again, we're going back to the anti-pro tweet, if you're pro-science, you believe in these guys. The thing is, though, again, just like with Black Lives Matter, as well-intentioned or as nuanced as the intention may be with Black Lives Matter, it's not that the people that don't go along with climate change as a political topic don't believe the scientists. They believe in science, okay? But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And if you're asking people, if you're trying to enact authoritarianism and do it politically, using rhetoric, using linguistic propaganda, using all these different things, using leverage on voters to say, well, if you don't vote for me, the other side, they don't give a shit. And I'm not talking about our scientists, but the other political side, they don't give a shit. That's their argument. You're either here. And so people, again, it's all our personal responsibility, our agency that we need to use and exercise to make sure that we are making informed decisions. We shouldn't be going just by political team because, we need to be able to rationalize why we're doing things in a way that's can be observed and is truthful. We all obviously we rationalize every decision after we make it. We make a decision on our ego or our impulses, our emotions. We're compelled. And then we turn around and we say, well, we did this because I'm reframing. There it is. So there's all these different angles to it. But basically, like when you politicize it, it really just changes the discussion. And it's going to inspire people to go with this idea. There are some politicians out there that are more globalist than nationalist. Some of them truly want to, lower our standing in the world. I believe that. I've seen that. But I think we've reached a new era with technology and all the things that have, all the ground up moments in science that has happened and been happening over the past 50 to 100 years and more since the start of the Industrial Revolution. I think the internet has allowed us to reach this place where we're not post-scarcity. We have to keep working hard to generate resources and create abundance, but I don't think we're at a place where the United States is too powerful or any country is too powerful, except maybe China because of the number of people that are there and the amount of resources they have. But I don't think we need to be trying to be more fair except for diplomatic purposes. Like, I don't feel any guilt from being in the United States. I think there's a lot of messaging from people that we should feel guilty for being American. I don't think so. So I don't think that we should, again, as Americans, I think we should have our Humvees. We should have our Hummers. That's right. Get a Hummer. But we should have that and not worry about harming our own economy or hurting third world countries that are trying to build theirs with fossil fuels. So we should improve fossil fuel efficiency, make it cleaner, make it better, make it allow it to be used more often, get more bang for your buck, as it were. But I don't think we should get rid of it.